No filter. Here we go. Karl Wienhold. If you haven't seen any past videos that I did, I've known Karl for a while. Karl is currently doing PhD research on several different parts of the coffee supply chain, but he was known back in 2021 for coming out with his book Cheap Coffee, which was published by Roast Magazine. And I remember like when I bought it and read it, and I immediately emailed him or whatever email I could find. I was like, I want to talk to you. And surprisingly, he was very willing to do so. And then sure enough, just a couple years later in 23, we went to Colombia together and got to visit a bunch of people that he had worked with when he was doing work down there with Cedro Alto, which is a collective down there. And yeah, just have become good friends. And we did a few of these back then, and I wanted to do a few more now, just because there's so many things in this industry that I think are really important, whether you're an industry professional or consumer, to just have the opportunity to learn. It's such a complex supply chain, and it's one of the highest traded commodities, billion-dollar industry. There's a lot of very powerful, greedy people at the helm who are in control. And I just would love to continue to break this down, figure out how we can find solutions, because at the end of the day, as we talk a lot about with Matt Priest, this like systemic issue, right? And trying to figure out how to kind of root it out and start over from scratch and figure out what actually will work. And when we say what will work, what I think we're talking about actually has really nothing to do with the crop and more about the holistic reality of the people who are behind that, which are the farmers, and why there's still issues. So here we are with No Filter. Karl, I appreciate you taking the time to hang out with me. Karl's in Lisbon, right? So you're 6 hours ahead.
Yeah, hello from Lisbon. Happy to be here. Always great to catch up. And yeah, I'm just here in this spot like all day for the last 4 years, thinking and writing and looking at numbers. And I don't get to talk to that many people about these things, so it's a pleasure.
It's like when I was living in India, and then like I would get so used to like just not speaking in English, and then I like 2 weeks would go by and I would like talk in English to someone, and it was just like my brain had a hard time. So I'm sure it's the same thing. You're just writing and reading, and then humans.
Yeah,
probably
I think
why
English has gotten better in the last years, because I like most of the academic papers I read are in English. Before that, it had been a couple decades.
That's great. Well, we're going to first start with the first topic being something that I feel like seems like it should be obvious, but I don't think it is. And again, whether it's people within the industry or not. And I definitely would love to hear a little bit of actual like statistics about this too, because I don't think people realize just the complexity of the issue of the industry abroad. But what is a smallholder farmer? Now, a lot of consumers may not have heard that term. We use it a lot in the industry. And I'm sure people, they started to hear things like single origin, okay, coffee that's from this area, but then like micro lots or things like that, which we touched on in one of our last videos. But this idea of smallholder farmer, focusing on the individual farmer, what that actually means and why that definition is actually important, take it away.
Yeah, I mean, I like we've talked about, I've heard this term a lot. I've used it. I didn't exactly know what it was. I think there are like some more commonly accepted definitions, but they're usually based on the amount of area in a farm somebody controls. But I've always kind of doubted this, and I'm also interested in like the motivation for it. Like, why do we care? Why do we want to know what a smallholder is? I don't know. Maybe nobody can know. But what comes to mind is that before you and I were working in coffee, maybe in like the 1980s, there started to be like some interest in knowing some more about coffee. There was some differentiation. It wasn't just one global product, Robusta and Arabica. That's it. There started to be like, oh, Central America, oh, East Africa, oh, that's what Ethiopia is different than Tanzania. Okay, and then there was estate coffee, and I think that was like, oh, not just the country. We want this estate. Great, of course, there's some problems with estates. We're talking about like semi-feudal labor processes in some cases, maybe not as late as the 1980s, but there are definitely some issues. There's like in that time, there was a lot of land reform, especially in Central American countries, civil wars about having access to land for the campesinos, those rural workers, and like the huge oligarchs, the coffee barons. So I guess that the word smallholder comes from like not an oligarch.
Yeah.
But then I don't think have correctly developed that term since then. And I mean, I've seen it defined tons of ways. So I don't know why do you think we should care about it, or what should we do with that?
I mean, it's a great question. I know one of the first times I was challenged with the notion of even what it meant was when I read your book, because you share the statistic that majority of the coffee industry are these people. If we're specifically talking about landmass, so if 80-85% or whatever is people with less than X hectares, 5, 10, whatever the number was. Your book, the reason why that was important was because you were talking about power structures and essentially how you have all these people with just a little bit not able to make decisions or agency based off larger conglomerates moving most of the coffee. And in that sense, it makes a lot more, it makes sense to me in terms of defining it that way. But since then, I am challenged with this notion as far as like, I don't fully understand what the purpose is either. And part of that was a challenge when I visited a farm with a group of people in El Salvador in 22, 23. And this was a well-known farm. I don't think they would be considered an estate based off size and labor, but the person who's recognized and who was recognized at this award ceremony was an individual and his family, which are very wealthy. But when I visited the farm, I was like, they're not doing any other work. Now, I know that there's more that goes into it, and there's like oversight, and there's everything from pickers to farmers to, but what does that mean to farmers? What pickers, farmers? Like, it started to not make sense to me, because I'm like, well, he's taking the award. Does he get the award because they were the ones who invested money in this land, or because their family owned it? Like, I have all these questions now because it just didn't make sense to me, because I was there and I saw a group of about 10 dudes who were like, those were the farmers. I was like, who are these guys? Like, no one gave me their names. They didn't even introduce us to them. So now I just don't know. And so that's another issue, is like, I can slap on a label for a consumer, like coming from this farm of notoriety, and even though they may not be a large estate farm, and so it's micro lot this and farm who cares about ecosystems, all this and that, but it's so much more complex than that. So I don't know anymore, because that experience taught me that, hey, this guy, there's way more going on. And now I'm even like, well, how do I even know this guy pays these people okay?
So we just don't know. End of video. No.
We don't know.
We don't know, but we don't know what how to define a subjective term, because there is no way that I can say this is what it is, because this is still to this day a subjective term. But I think we have to decompose what is even a farmer. Like in these some of these awards, like you mentioned, like, I mean, Best of Panama or whatever, like some of the farm, like the people on the stage don't even live in the country where the farm is located. So how could they be farmers if they don't even live in the country where the farm is? But I think this is an important distinction, that what is a farmer. So I think using area alone is not a good way to distinguish what is a smallholder, or like, I mean, whether even we need that term or not. Because I mean, you can have smallish farms owned by people who live off that farm, who have other careers. I mean, I've dealt with like lawyers in Bogota whose family has a farm, has like 5 hectares or something in Risaralda, and they say, well, I'm a smallholder. Like, man, you're a lawyer. I don't think you're a smallholder. That's like that's not what people have in their head. But like, what exactly is that distinction? So I mean, if it's not area, I think one thing is like, do you farm? Yes, no. If no, then you're not a farmer, so you're definitely not a smallholder farmer. But like, also in that sense, all pickers are farmers. Whoever is working on a farm doing farming is a farmer. Okay, so that's fine. then we have the distinction is what is a farmer and what is a producer. I guess I've seen this come up a lot in the last, I don't know, maybe it's 10 years or more. But this notion that, oh, I'm not a farmer, I'm a producer, as if being a farmer were a pejorative, that like, well, a producer is much more sophisticated. And I thought this is weird, but now I see that this actually opens up the door for another kind of non-farmer, like your landlord, who is not a farmer because they don't farm, they just like make money because they own land, but they can say they're a producer because they're somehow involved with it. Whether that's a coherent use of the word producer or not, I don't know. But also, like, what emerges now is like the intermediaries who used to be called coyotes, or like a derogatory way, or I mean still are, but now they can say that they're producers if they're like buying wet parchment and drying it or something. I'm a producer, or I'm buying cherry from these farms, and I'm buying cherry because like it's totally undifferentiated and it's perishable, so I get it. I just get it all, and I can make it into like very fancy microlata or whatever. Put some tangerines or coconuts in it or whatever, and then I'm a producer. Because that's like the bottleneck. That's where value is created in a neoclassical sense, without having to take all the risk of like dealing with weather, or dealing with bugs and pests, and like finding pickers and all of that risk. Like, what if there's no cherries? Then I mean, the whole cherry thing is another deal. But in any case, so now you have farmers and producers. But going back to farmers to see what is a smallholder, I'm just going to go straight into it. I think a much better way to deal with this is, what is the labor process behind this? Like, two things. What is the ownership of the means of production? So like, who actually owns the farm, who controls the land, owns or controls it, who owns the machinery that's used there, and the other is who's actually farming, because that's where you can have like your landlord producer or your actual farmer. And I think the best way to think about this is the concept of a petty commodity producer, which is a very well developed and defined term that I think serves the same purpose. I think it does what we want to do with the word smallholder. And that basically just means it's an owner operator. It's somebody who's like, basically they're able to run their own farm. And they have their farm. Maybe they're the owner. Maybe there's some, who knows what kind of land tenancy it is, because it's not always the same as maybe where you and I live. But they control this land. They control these coffee plants. They work there. Maybe other people also work there, but like a good portion of the work is being done by this family unit. So these are people who do not put their capital to work in order to generate a return on capital. They use their own capital, give themselves a job so that they can earn an income, so that they can survive. I think this is the important distinction. So that may have different sizes depending on the way that coffee is being produced. If there's more machinery involved, they own more capital, so they could be called more capitalist, but also that depends on the labor process. Do they have wage workers or not? So if there's a lot of machinery being used, like oftentimes in Brazil, maybe you can still be considered a petty commodity producer as a mode of production, even if you have a bit more land than you could deal with in the Andes. If you have to, everything is being done by hand. So I think that's a much better way to go about it, because for one reason in particular, that if that's your job, you're not a lawyer who has a farm like for fun because you like it, you like to go on vacation, it's some like extra money. That this is your farm, this is what you do all day. That's the way you reproduce your labor, by working on your own farm. Then you have to do it. Then it's not so easy to just pick up. You say, all right, you know what? That investment didn't go too well for me for this quarter, so I click, let's reinvest. It's not so easy to reallocate capital. I mean, talking only in economic terms. In social terms, there are much deeper reasons, I suppose. And then this means that you have to work in order to live. If you have to work in order to live, that means you have to produce coffee and sell it in order to live. So like, this is all like, I should be citing like 20 people right now, but this is all like kind of well fleshed out in political economics literature, that petty commodity producers have a tendency to expel surplus value, have a tendency to be exploited by productive capital, by suppliers of inputs, or by buyers of their goods, because they must produce and they must sell in order to reproduce themselves, to be able to survive. So they have the ability to sell below the price of production. They have the ability to sell below what is the value of labor at the going rate, and the valuation of capital at the general rate of profit. So therefore, if like they're selling to a capitalist buyer, they only buy coffee when it serves their interest, when they're able to meet the profit rate that they want, that they need, the general profit rate. But the farmer, on the other hand, does not need to meet that general profit rate in order. They have to keep going.
They have to, yeah.
So this automatically inserts a really fundamental source of the power imbalance between these smallholder farmers or petty commodity producers and productive capital, who only works when they make a profit. And if they don't make a profit, they go somewhere else and do something else with it. So I think this is really the distinction. So what does that make a smallholder farmer? That makes them exploitable. So when I hear roasters talking about this is a smallholder one, or like a importer saying this is a big smallholder lot, like, well, these poor little guys, we can help them. But I think this can be taken in two very different ways. On one hand, an estate farmer, a fully capitalist, farmer using productive capital to produce coffee, cannot be exploited, because if their capital is not valorizing, they take it somewhere else and they do something else. They say, I don't care, I'm going to cut this down and plant carrots.
Right.
I don't care if I lose some money doing it. But the people who need to produce to live every day, they can easily be exploited. So one, you could say, well, I'm going to work with these ones because I can exploit them. And it absolutely happens. Not that that's the way people think about it. Or the other one is, oh, these are these people that are often being exploited. Maybe we should buy their coffee and work out something to make sure that they aren't. But I've never seen that been explained when people talk about, like, this is called smallholder farmers. Yeah.
No, I love it. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think of it in the same terms as the US. It's like, if you produce, even maybe by having been an operator at one point and you made positive decisions, like there's still a way where you then take that capital, and to your point, you're now free to make decisions that can then invest in these 10 other ideas, and you nix what doesn't work and what does work, all the while having actually nothing to do with it. And I don't necessarily know if it's inherently wrong to do that, but I think it's back to the point of the imbalance of understanding value and work associated with that value. And really, I actually would think it would be less of a concern if that value was carried through the entire process, which is what a lot of times is the issue. It's not. So then you just have, I go invest in 10 businesses, and then truly at the bottom, there's exploitation, this is true everywhere, not just in coffee. And so I think I like that. I like the idea of like removing the concept of area and focusing more on the value of work versus ownership and that labor process. And I think understanding, like, I remember one farm I visited in Guatemala, the guy definitely was a little bit better off. I don't remember the size, wasn't huge, but he even had like World Coffee Research helping him out with some parts of the land. Whatever the intentions were beyond me, I don't want to, need to get into that, but like he fed us lunch. We sat there on this little patio, and he had just gotten done working like several hours in the field, and yeah, he had pickers, he had employees, but this was his shit. This was his life. Like, he was there on the land, and still living a modest life. And to me, that was like a really good representation of, okay, this is not, this is very different from the farmer I visited in Oaxaca, who literally is producing so little coffee. I don't even know how they put food on their table. So he's like doing better, but he's fucking in it. He's working it, and he's, making decisions, and, how that trickles down to maybe his pickers or the people that work for him, I'm not sure, but it made more sense to me. Like, okay, this is who we're talking about when we're talking about a smallholder farmer,
Get mad. Get mad, Priest Coffee.